I basically had the Wilfred Hodges, who's the son of Mr. and Mrs. Hodges. I worked with him on one document and the two sisters on another document. They lived there from 1920 to 1964. He told me about his uncle Ogden, who used to help fill the kerosene lanterns. They had kerosene lanterns in the 30s that went up and down the riverbank to try and stop the barges from going aground. Something very important that he covered for me, he and his father talked to the old-timers. And the old-timers told him, right down there where you have your animals ready to go on board the little packet or the little ships or barges is exactly where Robert Piatt's ferry was. Very interesting. Also discussed the 405 road, that originally it did go all the way to the water, but now when they were living there in the 30s and on, it only went halfway, and today that's the same way. It only does go part way. He was a wealth of information. I know some of this is hearsay, but if you tie this in with the fact of what's across from that, hold on a second, my mind went blank. I'll get to it. What right across from North Landing was a very active landing from the 1600s. You take into account the deeds and wills from Maldy Smith and Ward, which basically talk about the store. We've heard there was a store down there. We heard that Robert had a store, but we know Malty had a store. We know that basically Robert sold that land that he had acquired on over to his son Daniel. Daniel sold it for a nice profit to Maldy Smith. And Maldy Smith did have a store down there. In fact, his will and an inventory of his goods shows what was in that store. Also, what you find, the fellow in Florida for me found a list of post offices here in Boone County, and there actually was a post office down there from the 30s to about the 50s, and it shows that both Daniel and Maldy Smith both were postmasters down there. So you've got a lot of things that tend to make you think, yes, that's exactly where it was. It'll never be exact. I have not found any archaeological anything to show that it was there, but I think there's enough things pointing in that direction. Next. Yeah, that's North Landing that was just across from there. Going to the next. Here's a picture of the landing area looking towards the river and coming from the river back. And that's right at the edge of his property. I thought you'd like to see that. Hodges, not only did they live there, they took care of the place. They treated it as their house. They would paint every year. They put up wallpaper. It was their home. The other tenant farmers that came after them, after 64, there were 3 of them. And basically, the place got run down really bad at that point. They had other interesting stories like the shanty boats that would come up and want free food because they were starving. They had one man come up and they gave him food. He came back later, probably a few months later, and brought the kids candy. Candy in the 30s was a scarce commodity, especially for people that weren't rich. Yeah. Here again, yeah, this is a view from the river up. Now we get into a very, very interesting part, the graveyard. To be very honest with you, when I heard that they mowed it down, it just infuriated the heck out of me. And I made up my mind I was going to find it. I spent 2 years trying to find it, using computer analysis, aerial photography, old family photos, topographic maps, you name it. Duke Energy, like I said, will let me any place I wanted to go. Next. After 2 years, I gave up and decided to try another approach. So I got a hold of Steve Cochran, the computer expert. He did an overlay of an old map with a brand new map with the plan on it, so I could maybe figure out if I went to this area where the plant was, I could go out and find it. Then I contacted Roger Banks at the University of Kentucky, and he used his equipment with the old maps, etc., to find out about where it was. And then I used the Farm Service, Debbie out there, who was very helpful. And not only the aerial photography, but they used their equipment. So I had 3 different ideas of where it was. If you look at the last digits, 324, the 300, the 300, you can see they're pretty close together. But I still had a hard time. Next. This is an overlay. You can see that he's lined up and scaled the river, the 405, the other roads, and here's the power plant, here's the cemetery. I still couldn't find it. Next. Basically what I ran into is, like I said, weeds 5 foot tall. I knew, you see the stake over there? That's where it was supposed to be. And if you look down here in the bottom, you'll see something white that's part of the base. But I couldn't find it. Not only could not find it, I couldn't cut the weeds. They have some strange weeds around here. Maybe you know what they are. They grow in around each other. You can't, I tried to use a hand sickle to cut through them. I couldn't do it. Tried to use a weed eater. Couldn't do it. Just tear the weed eater thread right out. So I couldn't really get anywhere. So this is where it was supposed to be. Wasn't quite there. Next. Here's where we found it, right near that area. We came back in March of last year when things were down, and we found the basis for gravestones. Next. And then next, Patty actually found part of a gravestone, and that's sitting over there too. And it had an N and a C on it. Looks like one word ended in an N, the other one began with a C. So I checked all the kids, it wasn't any of the children. So then I checked the wives, and the only one I can come up with as a possibility is Ann Cadman Townsey. That was his second wife. That's the only thing I fit to go in there, but there's not enough proof to show that's what it is. But we did find the gravestone. Next. There's a close-up of it. Next. The reports on the paper said that the grave area was completely run down, goats run all over, tombstones down, everything. And speaking to the Hodges, I found that's really not true. They said there was even a fence with a gate. After a few hours of looking, there is the entrance, part of the gate entrance there. There's a latch, and there's some wire over on the right there, wire fence. Then something else interesting came up. As we're looking around the area, we see near the bases there's strange stones, about an inch thick, about 3 foot high, and a foot to foot and a half wide. And the interesting thing is they were straight up and down, absolutely straight up and down. So I got a hold of Bridget at the library, and this would have been on the west side of the graveyard. And she said that's where they buried slaves, usually on the west part. So it could be, it could not be, but it's very strange. Next. There's another one. And here's what I found out. The graveyard, the GPS showed it should be right here near the fallen tree. There is a fallen walnut tree there. And it looks like the bulldozers pushed it up, and the heavier pieces got pushed further. Partial gravestone is right there below it. And then you see the other 3 stones there. And the first one was about completely covered, the second a half, and the farthest one out was only about a 4th covered. think that possibly the bulldozer pushed all this up in that direction. I am absolutely positive, after speaking to the Hodges and the Mullins, that there is at least 12 different graves there, if not 15. Most of them said 15, some said 12. And I will look again. It's impossible for me to do anything out there after April. I can't do it. The chance of me finding another piece of stone probably aren't that good, but I will look. In going to Thomas More Library, look at the Chester Gleason collection, lo and behold, what do I find? There were other people buried there. This is a Ryan, a 14-year-old daughter. Her name was Elizabeth. And there was an article in the newspaper about that being there, and it showed it right next to Nancy Piatt's gravestone laying there. And it had been reported to me that by the Mullins family that it appeared like there were gravestones from different times there, different time periods. So there's a lot there. Next. Here is Mr. and Mrs. Hodges that lived there 1920 to 1964. I've already told you a lot about them. During the Depression and World War II, and whenever needed, they took in relatives, they took in their children and their families. They all were able to take care of the farm, produce what they needed to live, and like I said, even give some to folks that needed it. Another story they told me was about their Christmases. To them, a Christmas was probably a 2 to 3 foot Christmas tree. I think one of them said that they sat on a chair, they strung popcorn, and for color for the little Christmas tree, they would have a couple pieces of peppermint candy that they tied to the tree. Let's see. I think it was Shirley. Didn't you tell me that you got an ugly baby doll? And she still has this ugly baby doll.
My last bride doll.
Yeah. And her brother would get a little car. Also, they were lucky to have one pair of shoes a year. But here's these people that raised their family and taught them morals, taught them values, take care of their neighbors. They did it right. Thanks. There's the actual area that they farm. You see the two black trees up there? Well, they don't look like trees, spots. That again is where the graveyard's at. One of those trees is laying down. It's quite huge. These are a few of their family photos that they shared with me. Over here at the cistern, this pump, I have found the pump and the gear that was inside, but the top is missing. It was just laying on the ground like a piece of garbage. I did put a sealer on it to try and preserve it in case somebody wanted to do something with it in the future. Here again, here's that road that goes on the side of the house. You can see it goes right up towards those big trees, which are those walnuts. Here's a couple more family pictures showing their famous outhouse. I did find the roof to that outhouse. That tree you see on the right has fallen down towards that area. Here's our father plowing. On the right here, you see the tobacco with the hay barn. And I asked what was the worst thing about being a farmer. And they said, my dad would make me go through the rows of tobacco and pull off the worms underneath the leaves.